This week on Newsnight, the race for the White House and Florida reaction to a historic week following the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, and concerns over the future of Sunrail funding as local responsibility for the commuter rail nears. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Mort, and welcome to Newsnight, where we take a deep dive into the stories and issues that matter to Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, the Republican National Convention wrapped up this week in Milwaukee. We've been carrying the PBS NewsHour's live coverage of the evening sessions all week here on WUCF. Donald Trump on Monday picked Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate, deciding against Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who had been on the short list of favorites for the job. The convention came just days after the assassination attempt against the former president in Pennsylvania. Reaction to that from Florida was swift. Senator Rubio tweeted, "God protected President Trump." While chair of the Republican Party of Florida, Evan Power, spoke with me this week from Milwaukee. He says Democrats are responsible for the heated rhetoric in politics.
I think the rhetoric is heated up to a point where this was inevitable. When you refer to the Republican nominee as a threat to democracy, you have to expect some people are going to take things into their own hands. And so I think at this point, we can all condemn the actions, but the rhetoric that got us here is unacceptable. And I think that's unifying the American people behind President Trump so that we can make America great once again.
But some Democrats say that it's President Trump himself that's ratcheted up the rhetoric. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, I think that President Trump, under his 4 years of leadership, we had a more prosperous country, we had a safer country, and we were respected around the world. We've seen none of that for the last 3 years, and they call him a threat to democracy. So I think they've ratcheted up the rhetoric in a way that harms Americans, and that's what's really starting to take effect.
The polling does show, however, that people of all political stripes are concerned about the tone of politics, that they're concerned that things are getting out of hand. Do you think that in the coming months, as we get closer to November, that it's incumbent upon everybody that's running for elected office to try to tamp this down? Is this a learning moment as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think this incident makes us focus on what you need to sell the ideas that will make the country better and can bring people together. And I think what you're seeing in the aftermath of this incident is a uniting of Americans around the belief that President Trump is the person who can lead this country forward. And I think that we're going to see that result on November 5th. The American people are going to send a strong message that they want to make America great once again.
The Secret Service has received a lot of attention since this happened. Presumably, you welcome a call from House Republicans for an investigation into the response.
No, I think the Secret Service needs to be investigated by Congress. The one job that they have is to protect our leaders, and obviously they failed in doing that. So they need to be looked at and see what went wrong and where we can improve. And if someone failed, particularly and let something happen when it shouldn't have happened, they should be held accountable for that.
Evan Power, the chair of the Republican Party of Florida. Next, let's turn to the reaction of Florida Democrats. I spoke this week with Congressman Darren Soto, who's a member of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. He and other members of Congress received a briefing Wednesday night on the Secret Service operation at the rally before the shooting.
I believe there were gaps in security. There was 86 seconds that transpired from when local police, the folks who were responsible for the area outside of the perimeter, were informed of a potential shooter on the roof before those shots were fired. So we know there was a delay in response time. They had agreed on a perimeter that did not include the building that the shooter took refuge in. And so we know all the communication, who knew what and when, all very important. And we need to make sure that if there are local law enforcement who are working with Secret Service, that they are well trained. So there's a host of issues that Congress would delve into, and we know we're taking this very seriously.
President Biden and former President Trump have both called for unity. Do you think there needs to be a calming in the political rhetoric on all sides?
So I've always felt like the rhetoric is way too violent in American politics. I was in the chamber on January 6th. I saw how bad violence can get. And so I personally have tried to use rhetoric that wasn't aggressive, but more focused on policy. There are passions, but words of violence, sometimes people heed those calls. So we all have to be very careful about that. And look, we need to see it from both the president and the former president in the upcoming presidential race.
How do you respond to Republican concerns that efforts by Democrats to portray President Trump as a danger and a threat to democracy is what's to blame for the heightened tensions leading up to this shooting?
Look, the reality is former President Trump has said he'd be dictator on day one. So we know he's said statements regarding the fate of our democracy. He's palled around with dictators, and we had a whole impeachment on his relationship with Ukraine and Putin. And so there are political threats to democracy that are out there, but the solution is voting. It's not violence. And so no one's calling upon there to be a violent response. The only time we saw a violent response is sadly when the former president summoned thousands of people on January 6th. So I think we all now see that rhetoric can sometimes, unfortunately, lead to actions.
You can see my full-length interview with Congressman Soto on our website, wcf.org/newsnight, on the bottom of your screen. So let's bring in our panel now to talk about these issues in depth. Joining us for the first time, Asher Wildman from Spectrum News 13. Thanks for being here, Asher.
Thank you.
Good to see you today. Alexa Lorenzo coming back to the show from WFTV Channel 9. Thanks for being here, Alexa. Good to see you. And also returning to the program, Ryan Lynch from the Orlando Business Journal. Thanks for being here, Ryan. Asher, we'll start with you as you're new to the show. Spectrum News 13 has been gathering reaction, of course, to the events all week as well. What has your newsroom been hearing from Florida leaders about the assassination attempt and the temperature of the campaign? Does it broadly mirror what we just heard?
Well, I think for starters, I think it's totally changed from the day of what happened to now the days after it's happened, right? So first off, I think when it happened, I think the message from the Republican side and Republican leaders was this sealed the deal for Trump to win the presidency, right? I mean, that's what it was. Now, granted, there was a lot of reaction from folks about how horrible this was. Mm-hmm. We need to get more information. We need to be unified, what you're hearing. But then in the days later now, we're starting to see more, we won't go as far as accusations, but again, the rhetoric. That seems to be the key word for the past 2.5 weeks now, the rhetoric.
And WFTV, of course, has been gathering reaction through the week as well, Alexa. And backers of the former president in Florida have been showing their support for him throughout the week.
Yeah, it was swift. On Saturday night, we saw dozens of people gathering at Mar-a-Lago for a show of support in West Palm Beach. They honked their horns, had their flags, their Trump shirts. A caravan came up from Miami. Here at home in Palm Coast, we saw about, give or take, 30 people on the Matanzas Woods Parkway overpass there on I-95. In Palm Coast, and it was a similar scene. The flags, the shirts, Clearwater, they called it an emergency call to arms, but it mirrored what we had seen in Palm Coast and down in South Florida, that show of just being there for him and showing support and disgust of what happened. From a financial side, we had a huge GOP fundraiser. The national finance director for Trump's campaign put out a GoFundMe almost immediately to raise funds for the victims of the shooting. The goal was $1 million, and quickly it jumped. Right now it's over $5 million. Dan Newland said he would pledge $1 million to the family, the Orlando attorney of the family of the man killed. So we're seeing physical support from people here in Florida and financial as well.
Dan Newland, of course, has come out as a big supporter of the former president. There are, as we mentioned with Congressman Soto there, congressional and independent inquiries into the Secret Service. Now, Governor DeSantis, he addressed the RNC this week. He's talked about that security issue, right, Ryan?
Definitely, and he's kind of monitored and seen those calls and called on them his own. He's kind of wanted to see how somebody could get on top of that building with a rifle and be able to see. So he's kind of called for a full accounting of that, said there's been bureaucratic failures tied to that. So I think, you're kind of seeing him talk on the same line as many other high-profile GOP leaders, just in terms of calling for that full independent investigation into how this might have happened.
Senator J.D. Vance, of course, got the VP nod from President Trump over Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Do we know what might have counted against Senator Rubio from the reporting that's out there?
The chatter for some time since he had been put on that short list was the fact that he's a Florida resident and former President Donald Trump. is a Florida resident. And under the 12th Amendment, there's language that says the president and vice president it shall not be an inhabitant of the same state. So it really came down to that and the what ifs. There was chatter that Rubio would be willing to move, but what if then President Donald Trump did not win, and then there goes his senator seat. So it just came down to the legality of that, and they wanted to be 100% confident that they wouldn't be in legal challenges for months on end. Can you imagine winning and then going through this court battle of whether or not you're able to keep that seat?
Have you guys in your coverage been seeing any of that unity that Trump and Biden have called for since the shooting? It sounds like not.
I don't think so. I would say there's probably gaining unity if you're on each party side. And what I mean by that is, as Trump support grows, I think support behind closed doors with the Democrats trying to get Biden to back out, that support is growing on the Democratic side. I think there finally is now, we always talk about this boiling point, right? It was between Biden and Trump. I think the boiling pot of water right now is the pressure on Biden coming from his own side saying, you need to come out. And I'll tell you, there are committees here in Central Florida that are nervous. They don't know what to do because they all think Biden does need to back out of this. And if that's what you're saying here in Florida, imagine what they are saying in those crucial swing states. I mean, this is a problem that the blue needs to get unified on before they can talk about even trying to get along with the red. I mean, this is an inner party problem.
So what about the dynamics of the campaign that has shown Trump and Biden in a close contest up until now? I asked political scientist Frank Orlando from Florida's St. Leo University about whether the assassination attempt might change the race.
What I do think Steve could redimension the race is if the candidates act differently after this event. But if it's just a situation where after 1 week they both go back up with their attack ads and we're at business as usual, I'm not sure how this will affect the race beyond a fundraising boost for President Trump in the short term and to President Biden's benefit, less people talking about removing him in the short term.
Frank Orlando there. Okay, Alexa, there has been a lot of speculation, obviously, as Asha mentioned, about the status of the race itself. What have you guys been hearing?
We've been seeing that picture that you had in headlines over and over again. People are saying that image is indelible, and it's giving people who are on the fence, those undecided voters, a clear path. Like we just heard in your interview, we have now for a few days stopped talking about President Joe Biden's debate performance and concerns of his age. Now, of course, he has COVID, so we're talking a little bit more about his health. But for a few days now, it went from, okay, now we're talking about how strong former President Donald Trump is. So that's the chatter. So at this point, whether you're talking to consultants, people in the community, everybody's saying, this, while horrific what happened, is a good thing for the Trump campaign.
I just want to add, there's two different storylines right now with Trump and Biden. With Trump, he survived the bullet. With Biden, we constantly say it's 1 week since his poor performance at the debate. It's 2 weeks since his poor performance at the debate. Now we analyze if he can get through a scripted speech on a teleprompter and people make notes of how many words he misses or stumbles or misnames somebody with a prompter he's looking at. Two completely different tones right now on both sides.
Even getting into and out of the car when he flew now to
Everything's
Delaware
under a
after
microscope.
the COVID, everything.
Again, a reminder, we are taping this program on Thursday morning, so things can and probably will change by airtime. And if you missed the PBS News coverage of the Republican National Convention, you can stream it now, anytime, through the PBS app. Meanwhile, we wanted to remind you about Meet the Helpers, a WCF initiative designed to support the well-being of young children by introducing them to community helpers. There you'll find information on ways to help children understand emergencies and explain the news using age-appropriate words. It's all at meetthehelpers.org. Okay, next tonight, uncertainty over the future of a Sunrail station in Maitland.
In 2014, Sunrail began serving the Greater Orlando area with 16 stations connecting Volusia, Osceola, and downtown Orlando. Now, after 10 years, the state is preparing to hand over control to local municipalities, which are set to pick up the cost and operations of the commuter rail system to be run by Lynx, assuming responsibility for an annual deficit of between $50 and $65 million. But leaders in Maitland are hesitant over their share of the cost, which is about $280,000 annually. That number could double in the future. City Council members say the Maitland station is one of the least busy on the network, with about 30,000 riders last year. The council recently voted to opt out of its agreement with Orange County. The council decision gave staff 180 days to renegotiate an agreement with Orange County.
What have you been hearing, Ryan, about the planned discussions between the county and the city? I mean, and what are the stakes if the city doesn't pick up that portion of the bill?
Yeah, just in terms of the discussions, they've kind of been keeping the cards close to their chest in terms of what they're figuring out. Obviously, as they meet county staff and city staff, they're going to try to figure out the cost structures, what that might be. Winter Park, who also pays Orange County for their station, they wholeheartedly approved theirs. So it's kind of a different dynamic here. And what's at stake is, obviously the potential closing. Obviously, it wouldn't be an immediate thing should they, decide. It would be like a wind up. There's questions of who might have to pay for the closing of the station, whether the city would bear the cost. And obviously, with the proposed Sunshine Corridor, if that's to come to light, that would cut off the city of Maitland potentially from a connection to the airport to a connection to some of the other things like the convention center and South International Drive. But that's a big if that actually comes to fruit.
Mm-hmm. Very, very big if. WFTV's obviously covered this story closely too. Maitland had hoped that Orange County's transportation sales tax would pass in 2022, and of course it didn't. We heard on the program recently, Winter Park, as Ryan mentioned, is backing that move to pass it this year. I wonder what impact leaders think that the passage of a sales tax might have on Sunrail's future, whether it makes a big difference.
If it passes, it would make a huge difference. They need money, and that's how they would get it. But right now, even within, if this is brought up in a commission meeting, if you're sitting in Orange County chambers, those commissioners themselves don't know if it's a good time to bring it back up. It failed in 2022, 58% voted no. It comes down to money. Right now, Orange County is saying that its transportation needs roughly are about $21 billion. What they have right now for funding is $100 million. So it's a simple answer. It would make a tremendous impact if it passes, and then it would, as Ryan was mentioning, give you that line for the Sunshine Corridor, which in turn would increase ridership. Studies from FDOT have shown right now ridership's about 1 million people a year. Just taking it to the airport would take it to 3.7 million people per year. Throw in iDrive, Universal, a convention center, you're up 6.4 million commuters a year. But
the stakes are really high when it comes to that airport extension.
It's another what if, right?
It is.
But what's the plan though, right? We can throw money at a lot of things. I think one city that does it right is Sanford. You take the Sunrail into Sanford, they give you a bus that takes you into downtown Sanford. Why? Because that's where people want to go if they're going to Sanford. You're not going to the Wayne Dench beer distribution off State Road 46. So we talk about last mile, we talk about the purpose of this, but these Sunrail stops go to places that are not really conducive to what is needed for the Sunrail to be effective. Altamont, it's not even near the mall. I mean, these are issues that when we did Sunrail, it was great in theory, but now the realization is people are saying, I'd rather just drive than have to deal with this.
Some of these issues, of course, not unique to our area. A lot of large post-war cities that don't have transportation systems, legacy transportation systems, do deal with these issues that we're talking about here. I mean, Mayor Demings has said transportation writ large needs billions of dollars, right? Whether it's roads and rail, the airport. Do you get a sense from leaders of what they might do if that sales tax does not pass?
I mean, obviously, in the short term, Orange County, for example, had passed their $100 million package to kind of meet some of those short-term needs, but that obviously doesn't cover the balance of those billions of dollars worth of needs. In terms of different folks have suggested changing the legislative laws to allow the tourist tax to go through to
TDT.
Yeah, exactly. And that would provide a dedicated fund. Obviously, there's been some pushback from the tourism industry in terms of changing those uses and maybe taking them away from some of the tourist uses in the past that we've kind of seen. But most leaders, I think, believe we need some sort of dedicated fund to cover that. Obviously, if you're a smaller, municipality, it's a little bit harder to, cover versus if you're Orlando and your tax base is much bigger. But I think, a lot of it is potentially sales tax or bust if you're not going to change the TDT.
Yeah, and Mayor Demings told me last year that Orange County is talking with the state, with the legislature, to try to get some flexibility in the diversity of the funds that it can use. Meanwhile, we always want to hear from you on your thoughts on the news of the week. Be sure to visit us on social media. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find us on X at Newsnight WUCF. Okay, finally tonight, what do the issues facing the Boeing Starliner mean for low Earth orbit missions launching from the Space Coast? Helium leaks and thruster failures have turned what was supposed to be an 8-day mission for 2 NASA astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, into an indefinite stay at the International Space Station. Boeing has a $4.2 billion NASA contract to transport crews to the ISS. I sat down this week to talk about it all with Brendan Byrne, host of the podcast Are We There Yet? For Central Florida Public Media.
This particular flight is a test flight. It was designed to take 2 human passengers on a roughly week-long stay to really test out the vehicle, bring it back safely, and then engineers down here both at Boeing and NASA would parse through all of that data, give it to NASA, and then NASA would certify it for the 6th operational missions that it has on the docket right now. The issues that it's facing now put that in jeopardy. Obviously, the certification process is going to take longer than they expect because of all these problems that have popped up. Will we see, a launch that was supposed to happen maybe at the end of this year, an operational mission carrying 4 astronauts? Probably not. That's probably going to get pushed back a little bit. But we still don't know because we don't know what the root cause of this issue is to begin with.
NASA says we shouldn't be describing the astronauts as stuck at the International Space Station. If they're not able to leave, why can we not say they're stuck?
Well, they are able to leave. NASA had said that if there is an emergency, the crew can get inside the Boeing Starliner, they can undock safely, and they can come back to Earth. But their return is delayed indefinitely. We don't know when they're coming back. So it's kind of semantics, right? Are they stuck up there? They don't have a return date. So I would say they are stuck up there until NASA can approve them to come back home.
What does NASA say about whether there are enough resources for these extra astronauts on the ISS? It obviously wasn't planned. Are there a surplus of supplies?
Mm-hmm. There are. And NASA said that there hasn't been an issue with that. They'll continue to receive, robotic uncrewed shipment missions from multiple different providers up there. And there is slated to be another astronaut rotation that is coming to the station via SpaceX. But a little complexity in that schedule now. Recently, SpaceX launched an uncrewed mission of some of their Starlink satellites, developed an issue with the upper stage of that rocket. Those satellites didn't get
the Falcon 9.
The Falcon 9 rocket,
yeah.
Yes, thank you. The satellites didn't get into orbit, but that upper stage is what they use to push the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule into orbit. So NASA's going to be looking into the investigation of that. The FAA has grounded the fleet until they can get into that, get that investigation going. So the delay may be a little bit more to get humans back up there again. So Butch and Suni could stay up there a little bit longer.
What are NASA and Boeing specifically working on right now, and what will make them comfortable in allowing the astronauts to come back to Earth on board the Starliner?
Mm-hmm. The issue is within just a handful of thrusters that are on the service module of Boeing's Starliner. So we see behind us, we got Boeing Starliner there. The kind of the pointy end is the capsule, and that cylinder underneath it is the service module. There's a big engine on there that will get them out of orbit, but these thrusters that they noticed some issues with upon docking, there are some issues there. They at first thought it was a software issue. Seems to be it's a heating issue, so what they're doing is they're testing those same thrusters on the ground to see if they can mimic what happened in space and come to a root cause. The reason why they're taking so much time is that service module, that cylinder where these thrusters are, these 5 thrusters that are giving them problems, that will burn up in the atmosphere upon their return home. So they're not going to have access to the physical hardware once this mission ends. So they're doing whatever they can to test on the ground, confirm with what they have up in orbit, and then make the call They don't need those thrusters to get them out of orbit, but they need those thrusters to drive them and steer them in the right place when they do come smashing through the atmosphere.
Crewed launches are such an important part of what happens now on the Space Coast. And I wonder what these issues and those of SpaceX that you just mentioned mean for future crewed flights from the Space Coast. Does the low Earth, do the low Earth orbit missions look a bit different now? How does it affect that?
Yeah, without access to low Earth orbit, then yeah, we do stall what happens here at Florida's Space Coast. What's really important for NASA is to have what they call dissimilar redundancy. And that is to have two operators with two different types of vehicles working in case something pops up. In an ideal world, the issue that SpaceX is facing with its upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket wouldn't be an issue because they would have Boeing in operation as well. So Boeing could take over those missions should there be a delay with one vehicle or the other. For the majority of this commercial crew, for the entirety of this commercial crew mission commercial crew program up to now, there has only been one operator. And NASA does not want to put all of their eggs in that one particular basket in case something does happen. And we do have limited access to the International Space Station.
And you can find links to Starliner test flight updates and a copy of the interlocal agreements between the governments in Central Florida on Sunrail on our website. You can visit us online at wcf.org/newsnight along the bottom of your screen. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Asher Wildman from Spectrum News 13. Thanks for coming in, Asher. Good to see you. Alexa Lorenzo from WFTV Channel 9 and Ryan Lynch from the Orlando Business Journal. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.